Welcome back to the daily Rambam class. We are up to the laws of Sheini Chapter 9. It's Thursday after all, so before we take a look at today's chapter, as usual, let us look at where we are up to in the Rambam at large. As we've said, the Mishnah Torah has 14 volumes. We are right now towards the end of volume 7, the book on seeds. A total of 83 subjects, somewhere between 5 and 10 chapters, between 5 and 10 subjects per volume, and 1,000 chapters. So we are right now in the book of, as I said, Zera'im, seeds. In the 7th book, there are 7 subjects in this book. There's 85 chapters. Let's take a look at volume number 7, the book of seeds. Well, the 7 topics of the book of seeds are mixtures. That's the first discussion. The next is gifts to the poor, trumos, gifts to the kohen, meiser, 10% that's given to the Levi, meiser sheni, which is 11 chapters on the second tithe. This actually also includes 4th year fruits, which we'll learn about today and tomorrow. And then bikurim, first fruits, and finally shmita, the sabbatical, which is coming up in the near future. So these are the 7 subjects that are included in the 7th volume of Zera'im. Today we are learning chapter 9 of the subject of Meiser, Sheini, and Neter Avai, second tithe and 4th year trees. We'll be learning about that today, and please God tomorrow. And on Shabbos, we will be concluding this topic of Meiser, Sheini, and we'll be moving on to Bikurim. So let's take a look at today's chapters. There are 13 halachas in today's chapter. Let's pull up the texts. Okay. So here we are. Chapter 9 of the laws of Meiser, Sheini, and Neter Avai, the second tithe and 4th year fruits. And today, as we said, the topic is the 4th year fruits. So the produce of the 4th year, which is called Neter Avai, Ravai comes from the word Ravi'i, the 4th. Neta is planting, the 4th year of planting trees. Such produce is holy. As the Torah says, in its 4th year, all of its produce shall be holy, consecrated unto Hashem. So how do we treat the 4th year fruits? It needs to be eaten in Yerushalayim by its owners. It cannot be sold. It needs to be eaten as is once it reaches Yerushalayim. In the same way as the second tithe would be brought in to Yerushalayim. Just as the laws of the second tithe do not apply in Syria, so to the laws of Neter Avai do not apply in Syria. Now, with regards to Neter Avai, the Torah says, a person's consecrated property shall be his. So the Hebrew word consecrated is kodesh, holy. So the ish is kadosham lo yiyu, kadosh. So this is when we speak about holy, but that we could still eat it. Usually holy means that it is beyond us. It is elevated. It is not something that is mundane. But this is referring to, by our tradition, we know that this is referring to the 4th year produce, which is called holy, but which the Torah says the owner should eat. So that is the holiness of 4th year produce. Now, as far as redeeming it, so if you live in Johannesburg, and it's going to be a rather expensive operation. No, that's not a good example because it only applies in Israel. If you're living in Haifa, and it's going to be, and you have a whole farm, a whole apple orchards in Haifa, so it's going to be quite a big deal to bring all of the fourth year fruits to Yerushalayim. Take a lot of trucks, a lot of personnel. So as long as the fruits have grown in the fourth year in Israel and they are outside of Yerushalayim, soon we'll discuss how far outside of Yerushalayim, so they can be redeemed, just like we said regarding the second tithe. Now, if you're redeeming it yourself, then you need to add a fifth to its monetary value. Why does the owner need to add a fifth? I don't remember what the reason is. The Torah says so clearly. I think it might be, okay, I don't want to say something I'm not sure on, but if you're redeeming it yourself as opposed to selling it, you would add a fifth. By the way, when we say a fifth, it means a fifth of the final amount. That means that if you valuated your orchard in Haifa and you see it's worth 10,000 rand, the fruits of that orchard, not the orchard itself, but if the apples that you've just harvested in Haifa cost 10,000 rand, then you would need to pay yourself out 12,500 rand, an extra quarter, which would be a total fifth of the final amount. Now, you wouldn't be able to redeem those apples until they've reached the phase of tithing, meaning till they've ripened. And as the Torah says, to increase its produce for you, they need to be already considered produce. They need to be consumable. Okay. It cannot be redeemed while it's still attached to the ground. So you'll actually have to first harvest those apples, and only then you'll be able to redeem them, as is with the second tithe. And it is the property of the Most High. It's considered like it doesn't belong to us. We're allowed to eat it, but it's considered like it doesn't belong to us as a second tithe. Therefore, it cannot be acquired when given as a present unless it was given when it was not yet ripe. So he's actually saying it shouldn't be transferred. It should be eaten by the owner himself unless he redeems them. So, with regards to other matters, eating, drinking, and redemption, the laws that apply to it are just as a second tithe. So in summary, in halacha number 2, we've said so far that the owner, if he is in Israel and they are special, they are holy, but he's outside of Jerusalem, he can redeem them. He needs to add a fifth of the final amount at the right time, not too early, but once they have reached the stage that they can be redeemed. And at that point, they, but although they're special, they can be eaten, drinking. You don't need to treat them as if they're like a pair of tefillin. Not that type of holiness. When a person redeems a vineyard in its fourth year, he could redeem it either as grapes or as wine. So you might say, you need a, maybe if this is a vineyard that you use for wine, you might say it's not consumable until it's wine. No, it's already consumable as grapes, and you can redeem it at that point. Similarly, olives can be redeemed either as olives or as oil. But contrast to that, other fruits may only be redeemed in the natural state, meaning you should be redeeming them before turning it into juice or whatever it is. Okay, now here's an interesting one. Welfare. What's the welfare back in Yerushalayim? So there was shikha, which is if you left anything behind, it would go to the poor. Peya, you would have to leave a quarter for the poor. Peret, which I think has to do with olives. If you forgot some olives on the tree, you'd have to leave it to the poor. Oilelais, I think, is grapes that you forgot on the tree, you need to leave to the poor. Some of it fell off the tree. That's what it is, if they fell off the tree. Either way, usually we have all these forms of welfare, things that's of your vineyard that you need to give to the poor. But the welfare is not taken off fourth year produce. It's because it's not considered yours in the first place. It's considered holy. It's considered Hashem's. Nor should truma and the tithes be separated from it, as they are not, just as they wouldn't be separated from the second tithe. Instead, it should be brought to Yerushalayim in its entirety, or redeemed, and then the body would be taken to Jerusalem and used to buy food there, just like we said regarding the second tithe. Back to redeeming. I think that's misspelled. Please excuse that. Our sages ordained that grapes from a vineyard in its fourth year. So this is a very interesting one. The sages said that they should basically They wanted there to be a big supply of grapes in Jerusalem when everybody came for the pilgrimage. So I think most grapes were being used as wines, but they wanted there to be an actual supply of grapes in Jerusalem. So they said that anybody that lives within a one-day walk from Jerusalem, and has a vineyard, any vineyards that are located within a one-day distance of Jerusalem, should not be redeemed, but rather, if you're that close, if it's going to take you less than a day to get there, bring the grapes and let Jerusalem be filled with grapes. Okay, if you live further than that, it's already a big mission, so you can redeem it. But if you have a vineyard and it's near Jerusalem, bring it in. That's while the base of English was standing. But after the base of English was destroyed, as long as any fruit has not yet entered Jerusalem, any of this fourth year fruit has not yet entered Jerusalem, it may be redeemed, even right outside the walls. And even where the base of English did stand, this was a law specifically with regards to grapes. If you had your apple orchard and it was just outside in Jerusalem, right outside the walls, then you would not have to bring the apples in. You would be allowed to redeem them and bring the money and then spend that money on food in Jerusalem. How is Netzerevai redeemed? One should evaluate the size of a basket of food through the agency of 3 men. So you should form somewhat of a beis din, and they should estimate how much produce would a person want for a seller that he would pay for this fruit, when it is considered that in addition to having to pay watchmen, donkey drivers, and workers. So how much would a person be willing to pay for the apples as well as its transport, meaning the apples delivered to his doorstep? And after that rate is established, he should place down the money and say, so actually when I say how much would he pay for it delivered, it's actually the reverse. How much would a person pay for a delivered product, and then minus from that transport, because you're not offering transport. After the rate is established, you should place down the money and say, the holiness of all the produce gathered from this orchard is transferred to this money. And then they would estimate how many baskets worth a seller the field contains if he was redeeming it on a seller. In the Shemitah year, quite interesting. So he should redeem the field for its worth. You wouldn't include in the calculations the donkey drivers and the workers. For that year, there are no watchmen or workers to pay. If the orchard was declared ownerless, all that is necessary to deduct is the wages for gathering it, to actually pay somebody to pick it or to gather it. Okay, Shvita. It's quite interesting. If a person had an orchard that was in its 4th year of growth, and it was the year of Shvita, at which point everybody is allowed to eat from any fields. It's free for all. So you don't want people to eat from this 4th year produce because it's holy, it's forbidden until it's redeemed, and you can't redeem it until it's picked. So what do? So you should put mounds of earth around it, so that would be a sign for people to know that this is special produce that should not be touched. That's if it's in its 4th year. If it's in its first 3 years, then the produce is even more, it's more important not to eat it. Then you should actually mark it with baked clay, so that you have an added, stronger precautionary measure, because earth can crumble, but the clay will hold a strong sign to warn people that please do not consume of this. This needs to be eaten in Jerusalem or redeemed. Those that are meticulous in their observance of Torah's prohibitions would actually set aside money in the sabbatical year, in the Shemitah year, and say that as soon as anybody picks an apple, that apple will be redeemed on this cash. So like the farmer can't redeem it at the outset because it's still attached to the tree. But he could put the money aside and say that I'm stipulating that as each person grabs an apple and wants to eat it, it will be redeemed into this sum of money. Now, why is this for the meticulous? Because really, it's not the farmer's problem. He could just, as long as he notifies the public, it's their issue. But since he's meticulous, quite beautiful. What's meticulous in here? He's meticulous to ensure that another Jew that doesn't care enough to stay away will be prevented from eating non-kosher. I think it's just a beautiful description of what it means to be meticulous in mitzvahs. Not just to be meticulous in ensuring that you're doing the mitzvah in first class. But meticulous means that when somebody else is slacking, I want to ensure that he doesn't stumble. That's meticulous. Halacha number 8 through 13. Okay, so this can be complicated, but I hope that with the diagram that I've produced over here on the left, it will be clear. How do we calculate the 3 years of Orla when we don't eat the fruits, and then the 4th year when the fruits need to be brought to Jerusalem? So the Rambam starts by saying that the 1st of Tishrei, which believe it or not is coming up in less than 2 weeks, is the beginning of the year with regards to the reckoning of Orla and Netzerevai. Meaning, if you want to know how to count the age of your tree, Rosh Hashanah is considered the beginning of the year. But soon he'll qualify that. So how does this work? So from the time the trees are planted, that's when you count. But when we talk about trees being planted, they need to have been planted 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. Okay. And planted means that they've already been sitting in the ground for 2 weeks. So it's a total of 44 days before Rosh Hashanah. Meaning, when a person plants a tree 44 days before Rosh Hashanah, then that's already considered like a year. So you don't count full years. As long as the tree was planted more than 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, then it already was a part of 5781, 2020, whatever numbers you're familiar with. And even if it only arrived in, even if it was only planted in, let's say, to use terms that you're familiar with, on the 1st of November 2021, then the moment the 1st of January 2022 would come, it would already be considered 1 year old and going on year number 2. Although we'll qualify that too. Obviously, we don't follow the secular year. I was just using what you're familiar with, but he'll give examples of the Jewish year. However, so this is the first diagram over here. This first arrow over here, the person planted the tree more than 44 days before the end of year, let's say if you're counting year 10. Okay. And then that's already considered a year. So year 11 would be considered year 2. And year 12 would be considered year 3. But because of Orla, which should be a full 3 years, the fruit from this planting is not permitted until the 15th of Shvat, which is the new year of the trees. So we count from Rosh Hashanah to say that if it was planted 44 days before, it's already a year. This is year 2 and this is year 3. Looking at that first arrow. However, you would only be able to eat of the fruits from the middle of the next year, which, by the way, is still a total of less than 3 years, because it's 44 days from year 1, it's a full year 2, it's a full year 3, and half a year of year number 4, less than half a year. Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat, about 4.5 months into year 3. What is implied? When a person plants a fruit tree on the 15th of Av, which is 44 days before Rosh Hashanah, of the 10th year in the Jubilee cycle, it is considered as being Orla until the 15th of Shvat in the 13th year. Again, year 1, year 2, year 3, and then the 15th of Shvat into the 13th year. Whatever fruit produced by the tree during this time is Orla. It cannot be eaten, even though it did not ripen until several days, as long as it was produced, even though it only ripened afterwards, until several days, even though it only ripened several days after that. From the 15th of Shvat, from the 13th year of the Jubilee cycle until the 15th of Shvat of the 14th year, the produce is Netzerevai. It's in its 4th year, but it has to be taken to Jerusalem. Whatever fruit produced during this time is Netzerevai must be redeemed or taken to Jerusalem. If the year is declared a leap year, the produce grown in the extra month is considered as Orla Netzerevai. If they add an extra month to the year, then it's a 13th month year, and it's too bad. We don't count months, we count years. That's if it was planted on the 15th of Av. But if it was planted a day later, on the 16th of Av, or less than 44 days before Rosh Hashanah, in the 10th year, then the 10th year is not counted because it didn't actually grab hold of the ground 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. Instead, it is Ola throughout the 11th year, the 12th year, and the 13th year. So as long as it wasn't 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, then we count from Rosh Hashanah 3 full years, so then it's fairly simple. And it's there to revive from Rosh Hashanah of the 14th year until its conclusion, this 14th year over here. So that's year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. That's kind of the simplest scenario. Now, if I planted the tree between the 1st of Tishrei and the 15th of Shvat, okay, so that's the first approximately 4.5 months of the year. So then you should count 3 years from day to day for Ola and 4 years from day to day for Netzir Revai. So here you would go year 1, year 2, year 3, and year 4. I have seen Ge'aydi who have a different approach regarding the reckoning of Ola Netzir Revai, but it is not appropriate to elaborate in rebuttal of them. Theirs is a scholarly error, and we have already outlined the true path. So the work of Ge'aydim are not rabbis from the time of the Talmud, but it's from the era between the Talmud and the Rambam. And he says that there was another calculation, which I'm not going to get into because it's mistaken. Finally, I don't think I had this in my table of contents. Well, here it is. Leaves, blossoms, sap, and fruit buds are permitted in the years of Ola Netzir Revai. They're not considered regular produce. Grapes that were devastated by the west wind and ruined, grapeseed, grape peels, water mixed with grape dregs, the peels of pomegranates, their flowers, the shells of nuts and seeds within a fruit are forbidden with regards to Ola, and permitted with regards to Netzir Revai. So you wouldn't be allowed to eat it in the first 3 years, but year number 4, you would not have to take it to Jerusalem. Fruit that withers and falls from the tree are forbidden in all instances. Regarding both the first 3 years and the 4th year. Well, we've got 3 minutes to spare. Let's take a look at the quiz. What should be done with Netzir Revai? It should be given to a priest, should be given to the poor, or should be eaten in Jerusalem? You could show me with your fingers, 1, 2, or 3. Very good. You should be eaten in Jerusalem. May one separate Netzir Revai from oil instead of olives? Yes or no? 1 finger is yes, 2 fingers is no. Yes, it may. Well done. How many days before Rosh Hashanah does a tree need to be planted to be considered a year? 44 days, 30 days, or from before Shavuot? David, I don't see your finger. It's on the side of my screen. Other way. Correct. 44 days is the right answer. Yes, Stephen. Sorry, I only have a few scoops. I don't see everybody the whole time. So if I'm not mentioning your name, I hope I'm not offending you. Finally, which fruit did the sages decree that one who lived within a day's journey from Jerusalem may not redeem it, but rather bring it to Jerusalem? Grapes, pomegranates, or dates? Correct. The answer is grapes. You've gotten 4 out of 4. Thank you so much for joining. Wishing you a wonderful